November 1st of 2021, I was tasked with drawing Ezekiel's vision from God. It's the Lily Factor. Ding! Ezekiel is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible written by Ezekiel himself, who saw a vision of the glory of the Lord. I decided to start, I'm going to put on my work gloves and begin kind of writing down what Ezekiel's described as if it was a friend telling me, hey, can you design this character or scenario for me? And I said, sure, let me write it down here. It was as if I was sitting down talking with Ezekiel himself in book form. And I began, after writing down all the descriptions and looking through different translations to make sure that I really understood exactly what Ezekiel was describing, I began drawing from reference some of the things necessary to know how to draw to create a painting that would portray Ezekiel's vision of God. Now, Ezekiel describes some pretty wacky stuff. For starters, he spots these cherubim within these clouds that have 4 heads, one of a man, one of an ox, another of a lion, and then one of an eagle. So hence me drawing lions. I began trying to figure out what some of these animals looked like and how I could accurately portray them to ultimately make this big painting I was going to make. And one day I went outside to draw this eagle, hence the contrasting lighting, and I stopped and kind of realized, wait a minute. Ezekiel's probably not describing an American bald eagle. He's probably describing another kind of eagle that would be native to where he's from. So I did some research. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but the eagle that seemed to be the right candidate was the Eastern Imperial Eagle. That would be probably native to what would identify as an eagle. So I began drawing the Eastern Imperial Eagle, and that was a fun eagle to draw. I definitely am glad I drew that one instead of a bald eagle. Would have been a little weird if it was a bald eagle. And so then I did research on sketching oxen, which you'll see soon, and I just keep seeing my hair coming in there. It's so... oh, gosh. Okay. My hair. It always wants the attention. It's made so many cameos. Anyway, I start drawing the oxen. Ezekiel does not specify what kind of oxen he's seeing, so I just kind of went with, so long as they look like cattle and have horns, they're oxen enough, right? And then the next kind of thing was figuring out what the cherubim looked like, which you'll see me start to brainstorm soon, but in the meantime, here's oxen number 1. The next one I drew, I started with the reference, and I didn't shade from reference. I ended up just turning it off and shading from my imagination, because it was pretty easy to figure out after the first oxen I drew. And then when I finished these sketches here, brainstorming the animals, I layered varnish over it to protect the drawing from smudging, and then I added a chip clip just to keep the page from sticking since the varnish was still a little fresh. And then I move on to sketching out the cherubim, which had wings covering their bodies, 2 pairs of wings, a hand underneath each wing, and legs like men, cloven feet, and wheels beside them with eyes around the rims. Pretty wacky stuff. And the wheels described were supposed to either resemble chrysolite or amber. Different translations listed different minerals. So I just researched the minerals to find color variations that they had in common, since there's a lot of variations, and just came to the conclusion that the wheels resembled yellowish greens and oranges. And then it also describes that God has a throne of sapphire, so you'll see me painting sapphire. I know sapphire has different color variations, but blue is the most famed, so I just assumed that that's where Ezekiel was going with that. But to go back to the wheels, I will starting to do a rough sketch of the actual painting on this giant sketchbook I have that I never used until now. And I drew the wheels beneath the cherubim, and I realized that only one version I read said that the wheels were beneath them. Every other version said they were beside them, and it could just be me, but I'm pretty sure beneath and beside don't mean the same thing. Like beneath would mean underneath, and beside would mean next to. So I just went with the popular majority like a true trendy girl and decided to draw the wheels to the side, or beside the cherubim. And then I start doing sketching out everything, right? There's also Ezekiel chapter 10 goes into further depth about what the cherubim look like, and in Revelation chapter 4, there is some description of a creature that's kind of similar to these guys, but I didn't really think they were the same. But I just decided it would be fun to write a verse in Revelation 4 that these similar looking cherubim say about God, which is holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. So I decided to write that in there just to remember it. I don't leave that sketch in that place, and the final product doesn't have it right there, but I thought it would be a fun little thing to add, Easter egg, to say, hey, John, I was paying attention. I have a confession to make. Ezekiel chapter 1 describes the cherubim. Ezekiel chapter 10 describes a little more about the cherubim, because then he sees them again in another vision. This time around in chapter 10, Ezekiel describes that the cherubim have eyes on themselves along with the wheels, and I just didn't really want to draw eyes all over them. It was a little bit of a head scratcher to me as well that Ezekiel sees them in the first vision and doesn't really record that he sees eyes on them. And then in chapter 10, he goes, oh, and I noticed that there were eyes on them. I don't know how that can be missed. So I just figured maybe times have changed. Eyes came along later on. I don't know how that works, but okay. And so did not put the eyes on the cherubim. I did, however, put the eyes on the whirling wheels, which is what Ezekiel discovers they're called in chapter 10, which I must say I'm quite fond of the name Whirling Wheels. That should be like the name of a waterfall or something. I don't know. Anyway, moving on. Also, I noticed, I believe it was the New Living Translation, Ezekiel describes the wheels to be tall and frightening. So when I begin sketching at the cherubim and later on drawing the wheels, at first I drew them kind of small, and then I remembered, wait a minute, they're tall and frightening. And, I feel Ezekiel, you're looking at some creatures here with 4 heads, a lot of hands, with wheels with eyeballs on them, and you find the height of the wheels to be frightening. I don't know, it's funny the things that, people see things differently, so just interesting little thing. Also, Ezekiel, I haven't described everything that Ezekiel has seen in the vision. A lot of focus went on these first 4 cherubim, but Ezekiel sees clouds that look like crystal, and within these clouds he sees a throne made of sapphire, and sitting in the throne is God himself with legs adorned of fire and skin like bronze and his face glowing, and there's like a halo and an aura rainbow. I intentionally sketched it to where his head would be cropped, because I'm not going to paint God's face. It's like trying to paint infinity, as my mom brilliantly put it. How do you paint that? So did not do that, and that's also one of the contributing factors why I went from a vertical drawing to horizontal, changed my mind, because everything was kind of squished together, and this was just a better layout. I could get everything in there. Ezekiel also describes seeing creatures of fire and lightning, and that they were flashing around. I don't know if he was describing 2 separate creatures, or if maybe there were one creature that looked like fire and flashed around like lightning, but I decided a safe choice would be to draw a little bit of both. So you'll see me do really rough sketches of those, and I tried to, well, not rough, but loose, choppy, because lightning and fire move around a lot, so I wanted to make sure everything was very loose so that my brush could go to town and not follow so many guidelines from the pencil. It really worked out. Another intentional thing I did here is I wanted to make sure, as I stated before, that the cherubim were angled so that you could see different versions of the head, so I could showcase all their different heads, because that's probably how Ezekiel saw it too. It's not like he was able to, maybe he could walk around and get a tour of their heads, I don't know, but and the other thing was, as I said, I used a verse from Revelation that similar cherubim stated about God. So I decided that not only were they going to say that, but I wanted to make sure that the cherubim and, well, the male heads and the animal heads all looked like they were kind of praising, or, you know, some of them look a little furious, so maybe they're roaring out this praise to God, who was and is to come. And so that all was intentional. And I'll admit I forgot to draw the extra hands at the beginning. I had only given 2 pairs of hands, and then I remembered later on I did to draw the other 2 hands, since it's a hand per wing. I think I also wanted to make sure the wings were really big, mainly because they were covering their entire bodies, but also Ezekiel describes the wings to roar like thunder, and I would imagine that would have to be some really big feathery wings. So I tried to make them as grandiose as I could, and then I began sketching out God on the throne. I was really nervous going in with drawing fire. I've never drawn fire before. I hoped at first maybe if I draw it in pencil, that'll help me paint it better. But as it turned out, it was actually just better to paint it than to sketch it. And believe me, I was really happy with how I did the fire. So, you know, you learn something new with every project. That's always the beauty of challenging yourself to something new. I have to thank my mom. She actually was the one who said, "Hey, I want you to draw Ezekiel's vision and have it due by the end of May," and I got it done early. I'm pumping my fists right now, but you couldn't tell because... So here's the finished sketching product. After you get a little close-up of the roughness of everything, I'm gonna put varnish over it, which you won't see because that's not all that exciting. And then I'm gonna start adding some base wet layers of paint over it, which it's gonna look a little bright at first, but it'll darken up for sure, trust me, with that. So yeah, here's how it's gone sketch-wise. Ooh, I forgot another detail. There's so many details, I love that. But the cherubim, their wings, Ezekiel also describes that their second pair of wings are all touching one another, and he also describes that when the presence of the Lord arrives, they lower their wings. I would imagine it's a sign of respect. That's just me, but I think that would be kind of a reverent approach. And so they lower their wings when the presence of the Lord arrives. So I'm adding the presence of the Lord in there. So I kind of sketched at first, I think it was the first cherubim I drew, that his wings were kind of up behind him, but then I realized, wait a minute, their wings need to be lowered in honor of God's presence whilst touching one another. So I did that, and I also, the first day I sketched out the paint. I painted out, first day of painting, I painted out the lightning creatures first, and then I did some blocking of the fire creatures, and that was my way of messing with myself, because looking at the blocking, I was like, there's no way I'm gonna make this look like fire, it's gonna be so bad. But I think it was one of the next few days I'm working in on this that I painted them, and I was so happy. Very giddy. I had a blast painting the fire. And then I painted the clouds. Crystal has so many different colors. I don't know how to paint crystal exactly and make it look like clouds. So I just tried various of colors, and I prayed that this painting would turn out, that I would just get God's guidance to show me where my hand should go with each stroke. And I kept hearing, put a little red in there for the clouds. So I put red in there, and I must say I really like that there's red in the clouds. It's very subtle at the end of it all, but the red, I liked the red. Oh, the fire creatures, painting those now. So I back and forth with yellows and reds and oranges, and I also wanted to make everything affected by God's fire, that all the lighting that's projecting is mainly coming from him, then the lightning, then the fire creatures. So even the fire is actually being affected by God's light. So there's kind of a more yellow tone, orange tone to their top left for us, top right for them. So yeah. For the background elements, I used a really big dry brush, and I was very glad I did, because the dry brush was able to really, if I did the strokes just right, I could create this cloud texture. And I also used it just to kind of add that drippage in the background behind all the characters. It was really helpful just to create kind of a nice texture and not everything so fine paintbrush stroke kind of thing. Texture. It's very helpful. Very helpful. So I also used, you see how I have a little brown tint on God's skin there? I used these new markers I got that are kind of watercolor brush markers, but they're glittery, because I thought bronze, it's shiny, has a little bit of a sparkle to it. I thought that would be a good little base for that. Well, later on, those markers are a big problem for me, and you'll see how soon, I promise. Now I've moved on to painting the cherubim heads. I tried to individualize it by, species, so that the paint colors weren't getting confusing, because I had to mix for a lot of the colors, especially the brown tones. And so I started with the lions, and I felt very proud of myself for how tiny my brush strokes were. I used a fine brush, but it's still not that fine. So I was very pleased with how tiny my strokes were. And I'll show at the end just like comparison of, say, next to my pinky, how tiny these brush strokes were. And yeah. But basically, in total, I believe I have 10 hours, maybe a little more than that, of footage for this particular project with all the brainstorming and the actual painting and everything, and it went day by day. So in total, I spent 10 days, basically, is what I'm getting at. And it's probably the longest project I've ever worked on for an art piece. I've had some that have taken me a week. I know there was one that I spent from I would say 10 to 8 p.m. for 3 days. There was one project I worked that long on it, but that also had a much more pressuring deadline than this one. But the 10 days does include all the brainstorming that went into it as well, and not just painting on the big canvas, which I knew painting on a larger canvas meant it would take more time, but it was very gratifying because I was able to get all those fine details in there. But this cherubim on the very left, I was really pleased with this one out of everything. I just felt like the way I painted the skin was really just adding that dimension of the lighting and everything. I was very proud, very pleased with that one. I shouldn't have been. It'll all be in vain very soon, just trust me there. Next cherubim in the front, I went back and forth. Sometimes I accidentally made the skin muddy with I didn't want it to be a goatee, but that's kind of how it ended up looking. I also realized I didn't color his eyes, so when I painted the eyes on the wheels, I went back to give his eyes colors and not just a black dot, but it's so minuscule you wouldn't even notice I added color to his eyes. But fun fact, the eyes are green. So I then painted God's skin. I still am like, I don't know if people would look at this and think bronze, but that's apparently my idea of bronze. I think it's a little more golden than that, but I still am very pleased with how it turned out. And then I went on to the wings and blocking everything out. Soon the footage, this is when everything starts to kind of work against me. This was, I think, either the day before, like the day before the final day of completing this, or maybe it was the day before completing it. Let me check. But anyway, that's when things started to kind of get mixed up. Just because all of a sudden the video footage stopped and you see, bam, now there's green on the wings. And I looked at my device and it just decided that I was out of storage, when indeed I was not out of storage. So I had to stop painting that day. And yeah, so it was the day before I painted I was looking while I was talking, but it was the day before the day I finished. But I had already made sure I deleted a bunch of things so I wouldn't run out of storage, because I knew this would be a lot of recording. But then my device decided to mess with me. So I had to go and take all the footage I had already been recording and condense it and shorten it, which actually made editing the final product a lot simpler. But then my device just decided to keep making that claim, so I'd have to reboot everything to get it to quit it. But yeah, so I start painting the eyes here, and this was tedious because I had the fine brush to paint the outline of the eyes and then do the pupils and everything, but so many times something would happen and the eyes would smudge. For some reason, the paint took forever to dry in that one spot, so they kept smudging and I would have to repaint those particular sections, and it became quite laborious. But in this wheel too, may that one little section in the middle rest in peace, because it's not going to be quite the same either. Yeah, it'll all show soon, and it's coming right around here. So these watercolor brushes I got, they kept spilling ink, so I used my hand a lot to protect it. Boy, was that a mistake. You see, I got ink on my hands. Except even though these are watercolor brushes and they dissolve from water, they would not come off my hands. As I'm voice recording right now, I'm looking at a hand that's still a little blue. They're finally starting to wash off, but I've had alcohol-based markers wash off easier than these watercolor brush markers. And this is the demise right here. Despite them being gouache paints and reacting to water, I've had water drip over them before. This has never happened. This painting has been dry for a good long time, but that water dripped down, and the next thing I know, it removed all the pigment that went with it. The weirdest thing. And things were just that's what my hand looked like for the longest time. But things were just going wrong, left and right. I literally had instances where it was like my hand was holding a brush really tight, and it was like something knocked it out of my hand. I was having brushes falling on the floor left and right. It was the most ridiculous thing. I'm not a messy painter. I don't really drop paint or brushes or anything. But this one day, I kept dropping everything left and right. It was bizarre. But I did repaint the forgotten paint job, and it looks exactly the same. And it did work out with the lion head, though, because, like I said, everything is supposed to be affected by God's light. And as it turned out, I couldn't exactly replicate that particular lion's paint job, so it was a little darker, but it made it look like his face was shadowed a little bit to the side, which worked out perfect. And I was really nervous about the angel's skin, because that was also made with paint colors, so I didn't know how to get it back, but I did end up making the paint again. So yeah, I painted white auras around God, and you know, if you like put your flashlight to a TV screen that's pitch black, you'll see the light and then kind of this like rainbow rays coming off to the side. That's what I tried to convey around God's head. So if you see up close, you'll see a little bit of a rainbow ray coming out of the side. And I had fun with the little orange aura underneath the fire, because I used the watercolor brush marker, and it erased some of the pigment of the gouache, but it created this glow that looked really good. So I tried it. Ezekiel described that everything had an aura, including the cherubim. So the way I see auras is kind of just this blue, green, white, or yellow minimal glow around things. This is much brighter than how I would see an aura, but I tried my best with that. And it helps keep the contrast as well. So then I began writing the Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord God Almighty. And then the painting will be finished, and I'll write my name and all will be done. I'm so pleased that this managed to be finished and that I actually managed to create the video in spite of all the technical difficulties, including editing it as of now, because it took multiple hours to load. So here's pinky comparison of how small those details were, since that is my littlest finger. Weird wording, but here is the finished product. You get to look at it all up close, and all the little details. You can see a little bit of the sparkle of the glitter. It's always nice to have a little bit of glitter in things that are supposed to be shiny. So, yeah. I love how everything turned out. Every little brush stroke and detail and aura, and it's right. So I hope you all enjoyed watching the process of painting Ezekiel's vision from God. It was fun researching this and brainstorming, and definitely worth all of the effort. I'm so pleased to have a big painting on a big sketchbook now. I'm very proud. So with that being said, thank you all for watching. May God bless you in your life and your art. Bye.